So everyone needs a home to live in, right? Maybe not. So our guest today, I'm so excited to talk to her about this. She was a full-time nomad for 6 years. She just moved into a home again. I think what last Friday, Sarah, is that right?
A few days ago.
A few days ago. After 6 years living as a full-time nomad. I'm so excited to have this conversation. So quick intro. Sarah Weaver is a full-time investor and entrepreneur. She owns and operates Investor Adventures, which we were chatting about before hitting the record button. It's almost like a mastermind retreat adventure vacation that real estate investors get to write off as a tax write-off. So I love that. And I would love to have a separate episode all about that. But I will stay focused for the moment. Sarah, talk to us all about life as a full-time nomad. How did you get into it? What are the pros and cons? How can other people, what steps do they need to take if they're interested in this? Walk us through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started out with a remote job. So I had a boss, I had a job. It was a W-2, and my boss said I could live anywhere. And so I definitely bought a one-way ticket and was like, all right, let's try this. And so my first stop was Colombia in South America. And I definitely learned a lot in those first 3 months. I committed to 3 months because I was able to park my car at my parents' house. I think I already had all of my mail going to my parents' house. I joked that my mom was my secretary, and I'd often tell her she was like employee of the month. And she would usually text back something cheeky, "Can you fire me now?" Because I think she found the responsibility of opening my mail very annoying. And what did I had an international SIM at the time, like, I bought, like, a cheap Colombian SIM, so even my, like, US phone number didn't work for those first 3 months. I was using Google Voice, so that was what I considered, like, my work number, but it was definitely what I would say hatch milled together. Like, I was not a professional. I was like, "Yeah, let's just see if it works." And I think for me, that worked great. I also was in between leases. And so I was able to put all my things in storage and in the lease and then go abroad. And then what was nice about that was imagine your utilities and rent all being wiped away. And now I'm living in a country where I was probably spending like 11 to $17 a night. And so my budget also was pretty small because I was hoping I could save money so that I later could go to more expensive countries. And so I say that to tell the audience that, like, you don't have to have it all figured out. I just was like, "Let's try it." And I fell in love with it. I loved being able to practice my Spanish at the grocery store. There were tons of Facebook groups to meet other digital nomads. There was a group called Digital Nomad Girls, and still to this day, I'm friends with people that I met from that trip. I was dating someone at the time who was very much go to college, get a good job, get married, have kids, invest in your 401k. And so admittedly, he hated it. He was like, he was not into learning Spanish. He had no desire to make friends with people that he was going to say goodbye to at the end of the 3 months. And so I joke that was almost like a handshake breakup. It was like, goodbye, go live your life, go marry the person you're supposed to. And I remember I wrote in my journal, I want to buy a lot of rental properties so that I can cash flow, continue to work remote, and live abroad. And what's really cool is about 7 months later after the breakup, I bought my first rental, renovated it, rented out all the rooms, and bought a one-way ticket to Argentina. And 6 years later, I am now full circle ending said nomadic life.
Oh man, there's so much I would love to dig in with you. And as a lot of the audience knows, I myself am an expat, about to move back to the US actually, but I've been abroad for 10 years, love expat life, love living internationally. And what I always think of as the greatest challenge of moving abroad is just having that income you can earn from anywhere. So I'm curious if that was also your experience. That was the core keystone to all this. That because the other stuff I have found is relatively easy, getting arranging the visas and the tech stuff of getting like a phone number working in the US and banking, SIM cards for your cell phone, all that stuff I found to be relatively straightforward, but
Yeah.
you need to have the remote income. So yeah, tell us what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so back in 2015, I had just moved back to the US from teaching English in South Korea and had met that guy that we're talking about, and he had a normal job that took him to Texas, so I followed Love to Texas. And like a bad country song, I lost the man and the dog and
In the tractor.
exactly. In doing so, I only was applying for remote jobs because if that relationship was going to work, we were gonna eventually leave Texas, move somewhere else, etcetera, and I only applied for jobs that were remote, and this was in 2015, you guys, and there weren't as many. Now it's so common. I found that I had to take a lower salary because it was seen as, like, a huge benefit to be remote, so I definitely got paid less, but lucky for me, I hadn't experienced any lifestyle creep. I have always been very good at money and saving money, and so I definitely didn't have very many expenses, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners might not be in that situation. I definitely have a lot more expenses now, 10 years later, but that was one of the benefits, and so going abroad with the job was key, but then what happened was I mentioned that I bought that first rental property, then I realized, "Oh, wow, that was putting another basically $700 of pure profit, cash flow above my mortgage, above expenses, setting money aside for vacancy repairs, all of that. I was cash flowing $700. And so that was a huge help. Then I bought another property and added basically the same, almost $1,000 of cash flow was that second deal. It was an even better deal. And I was like, wow, I'm actually not that far away from just replacing my salary, which at the time was probably between $3,000 and $4,000 a month. And it's exactly what I did. So I bought enough rental property in 2021 that I completely replaced my salary. And so I actually quit my job and started businesses where I was able to work from anywhere. Like everything I've ever done has been remote, even the buying real estate. So I've bought real estate in places when I bought in Des Moines, I had never been to Des Moines, Iowa. When I bought in Omaha, I'd never been to that part of the city. And I was writing offers sight unseen, doing everything sight unseen. And so I think that it was partly out of necessity because I was living in Brazil, so I wasn't gonna fly back to look at property, but also what you're saying, it's like the desire to have remote income was so strong because I had fallen in love with this way of life and never saw myself having the ability to go back and, like, go to an office in the US.
Yeah, I certainly love that you reached financial independence through real estate. That's something that we talk about a lot on this show because that's part of what we do is we run an investment club for people to invest in real estate and do it hands off and remotely and do it from anywhere in the world. So that all of course resonates a lot with me. Before we wrap up, I'm just curious about what you saw as some of the greatest challenges of the nomadic lifestyle.
I think number 1 is health. I think for someone that moves abroad that already has healthy eating habits, exercise routine, they are definitely at an advantage because you've already put those habits into place. But for someone like me that was like, "Ah, yeah, like sometimes I work out. Yeah, I like eating healthy, but it's not a way of life." Moving constantly, and, like, last year, I flew 85 times. So I was not an expat like you where I had a home and would
Right.
join a gym, like, I was on the road full time, and that just catches up to you, like, getting 5 hours of sleep consecutively, drinking at these social events or speaking events or conferences. I think I got to a point where I was like, "I am so physically tired," that eventually you become emotionally tired, and I think that was really the writing on the wall that was like, "I can't keep living like this." It was amazing. I just recently went to a Greek restaurant here in Kansas City, and I the dessert that I had, I'm not joking you, I think I was transported back to this Greek island that I was at a few months earlier. And so the food experience that I had while traveling was amazing. However, like, the lack of healthy habits just became exhausting.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's not what I thought you were going to say as the greatest challenge of being a nomad, but that's fascinating. For just listeners out there who hear about you traveling, doing 85 flights last year and just constantly moving, it's worth bearing in mind. We didn't have a chance to talk about this in this recorded episode, but Sarah and I were chatting before hitting the record button about how her business, her current business revolves around travel and speaking and hosting retreats. You don't have to go at that speed if you don't want
No,
to.
and I don't
Uh,
recommend it, guys. That would not be what I will say is the very first thing I did when I became a nomad is I stayed 3 months in one country,
exactly.
3 months in another country. Then I probably traveled a little bit faster for a couple months, got tired, and then stayed somewhere again for 3 months. That is absolutely what I recommend. I recently had dinner with a couple, and the husband's never been to Europe, and the wife studied abroad in Europe. And so "We're gonna go to Prague, we're gonna go to Vienna," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, don't do that. Don't do that to your husband. Choose 1 or 2 places," but they're thinking they're gonna go from London to Paris to Rome for 2 nights, and I'm just like,
They're gonna
"Don't
get
do
burned out.
that." Well,
Yeah.
it's also that's not a way to experience a place.
Yeah.
Think of any, like, US trip that anyone's ever done. If you had a layover somewhere or you drove through, you didn't really experience the city or the people or the culture, and that's, I think, what you want when you travel abroad, and so I definitely learned from my mistakes. The only reason I traveled so fast last year was I spoke, a lot on stage. I wrote a book that was published by Bigger Pockets about a particular investing strategy called the midterm rental strategy, which is something that I love. It's changed my life and my investing. And so last year I committed to speaking on a lot of stages, and I'm glad I did it. And I'm very glad to not be speaking on so many stages this year.
I'm sure the US is glad to have you back. And Sarah, let's wrap it up by just letting our audience know, where can people connect with you? What do you do to help people and how can they reach you?
Yeah, so I run a program called the Mentorship Program where I help real estate investors really build a life and the portfolio that they love. And so if anyone's looking to have a long-term mentor, I would love to be a part of it. If someone's on the call is just, no, I just want to pick your brain, I also happy to hop on like a 30-minute, 40-minute call. And so the best way to find me is sarahdweaver.com or reach out to me directly on Instagram. It's Sarah D. Weaver.
Awesome. Sarah, this was such a fun conversation. And guys, consider joining us in the co-investing club if you are interested in investing from real estate from anywhere in the world. Yeah, we do hands-off investments every month. It's fun. And if you got a fresh perspective out of this episode, subscribe. We are on here twice a week and pay it forward. Pass it along to a friend, family member. If you didn't get anything great out of this episode, then email us at support@sparkrental.com and tell us what you do want to hear more about. And on that note, stay weird, unconventional investor, and stay in touch.